Return Black, Chapter 1. Amelia. She stood in the very heart of the theater, gilded in gold. Still, silent, her eyes wandered across the hall. None of this was familiar to Amelia. These were things she could never have imagined seeing. She had spent part of her life in a small town and had sacrificed the rest trying to make sense of it all. The red velvet seats were slowly filling up as time moved on. The night's theme was a farewell to life itself, and everyone looked like stars resurrected from old Hollywood. From her quiet corner, Amelia could see it all unfold. It felt as though those long-lost stars had made a pact with God to appear just for this one evening. Amelia, too, wore a costume. For a single night, she had chosen to become Amy. She wondered how people would respond when they saw her. Would they feel sorrow, or would pity be enough? If there was one thing she had learned long ago, it was that human beings were created only to feel two things: to pity and to mourn. To pity and to mourn. Amelia held a glass of whiskey in her left hand. Her fingers clutched it so tightly that the color drained from their tips. It wasn't hard to notice. The guests, now accustomed to Amelia's quiet presence, watched her in disbelief as she refilled her glass again and drank as if she had stumbled upon an oasis in the desert. She didn't particularly enjoy being watched, but she couldn't deny that she was used to it. People's attention had always found its way to her. She was, after all, good at drawing it. And knowing that their fascination with her drinking was more than just the evening's theme, filled her with a strange, perverse kind of satisfaction. She knew well that Amy hadn't been killed by her drink, but by the pain she carried through life. To Amelia, the drink was simply a ticket, one that could, perhaps, take her to heaven. And it was a rare ticket to win. After a few more sips, her stomach began to turn. She tossed the glass aside carelessly and rose from her seat. Her hair, once tightly pinned, had loosened. Her mascara had smudged across her pale face. The black dress that trailed down to her knees no longer felt comfortable against her skin. She wasn't in any state to audition anymore. She reached into her worn handbag and handed a crumpled piece of paper to the man beside her, dressed as Elvis Presley. The man, visibly pleased, nodded twice before handing her a glass of wine. "See you around, beautiful," he murmured. "I've never met anyone who drinks as gracefully as you." As Amelia made her way toward the exit, a familiar song began to play in the hall. Was it a warning? A sign to stay? She had always loved that song. She tried to sway her legs to its rhythm, to dance one last time. The good part was, she wasn't the only one. The room was full of people just like her, who had once lived for the dance. A man dressed as Michael Jackson passed in front of her and began performing as if it were a real show. Amelia thought to herself that Michael Jackson probably hadn't seen her dance. And it was just as well. If he had, even in his drunken haze, he might have found it terrifying. Everything that had happened was making her stomach churn again. She reached for a small piece of peanut butter candy, the only thing she could find to calm the nausea. It wasn't much, but it was something. She ran out of the grand hall so quickly that she imagined little puffs of dust following her, like in the old cartoons she had always adored. And yes, Amelia had always loved cartoons. Cartoons had been created to comfort innocent children, to promise them endless happy endings. But Amelia knew better now. If she could, she would have told every child that reality doesn't stop just because you wish it to. There comes a moment when illusions must end, even for her. The streets she walked were empty, echoing with silence. To her, the world felt both hollow and full at once. Perhaps people gave meaning to things without even realizing it, or perhaps, at times, they took it away. The glow of the streetlights slipped quietly between the cracks of her loneliness. Reflected in her dark eyes, the lights shimmered like distant stars. Music. Music was the only thing she still valued in this world. She had lived for years without love, without kindness, but never without music. Pulling her phone from her pocket, she swiped across the bright screen and played a fast, rhythmic song. For that fleeting moment, life seemed flawless again. Maybe this one night, was the reason she had lived all along. She had never made it to an audition before, yet here she was, standing in the heart of Hollywood Boulevard, feeling an unfamiliar peace bloom quietly in her chest. For now, that was enough. Oh, what she wouldn't have given to stay here forever, to live in this vast, radiant, heartbreakingly beautiful city. Amelia. Beautiful Amelia. Chapter 2. Jasper Wood. The restless lights of the lonely Hollywood hills spilled through Mr. Jasper's wide window, flooding his living room. He placed the gun he had been holding carefully on the table, imagining for a moment that he could walk away, that he could somehow switch off all the city's lights at once. He longed for the darkness of night to cover him completely, to let him disappear within it. But those damned lights, they never allowed him that mercy. Of course, he couldn't simply turn off the city's lights. The world would keep going as always. Everyone would go on living, everyone except him. He had stopped interfering in life long ago, even in his own. Tonight, however, would be different. Tonight, he would finish what he had started. Once the story of Jasper Wood came to its end, it would remain closed forever. He had spent years quietly preparing for this. He had rehearsed it in his mind so many times that the thought itself had become familiar, almost comforting. Tomorrow, there would likely be a small, modest funeral at the church. Reverend Brown would send him off quickly, with little ceremony, and perhaps even with a touch of relief. Jasper had grown accustomed to the dull comfort of death. The thought of dying no longer frightened him. It soothed him. Reverend Petter Brown, respectable as ever, had grown used to such things by now. Jasper had spent nearly every day of the past few years at church, attending quiet private funerals far from the public eye. The strange peace that came with death was something he had come to savor a little more each day. Lately, though, even Reverend Brown had begun to lose patience. He no longer tried to stop Jasper, but not because Jasper listened less. It was simply that God himself seemed unable to reach him anymore. After a long breath, Jasper gathered what courage remained within him. He reached across the table, took the gun back into his trembling hand, and closed his fingers around it. Now, at last, he felt ready, completely, terrifyingly ready. When Jasper lifted his gaze toward the ceiling, his eyes caught the family portrait hanging on the wall. How strange, how unbearably cruel, that sentimental things always seemed to appear just when a man decided to die. He was no longer foolish enough to let an old photograph break him. 39 years had hardened him beyond that. He had written, again and again, that if life remained this barren, this hopeless, he would not see 40. Hundreds of pages filled with promises to himself, and now the final one was about to be kept. He lifted the gun until it rested against his temple. The metal was colder than he'd imagined, a quiet, unfeeling witness to a life fading without applause. Every role he had ever played, every mask he'd worn, now dissolved into the same empty lie. All that remained was the ending. "My name is Jasper Wood," he began, his voice calm, too calm. "For exactly 39 years I have lived this so-called grand life. Tonight I choose to end it, freely, deliberately. Don't blame yourselves. Dying alone was always my decision." He paused, eyes unfocused. "I've tried to love you. I truly have. But perhaps I never loved enough, or not in the way you needed. If I'd been capable of more, maybe I'd have found a reason to stay. If there is a better world than this one, then perhaps we'll meet again there." He stopped the recorder. The silence that followed was immense, vast enough to swallow him whole. He tightened his grip, ready to end it, when something impossible happened. A sound, faint, fragile, slipped into his ears. Music. For a moment, Jasper couldn't move. He knew that melody. He was certain he had heard it before, long ago, when the world still had color and warmth. Each note carried a ghost of his past, whispering to him like an old friend he had lost too soon. The gun grew heavier in his hand. Tears gathered but refused to fall. How cruel, he thought, that the world should still play music for the dying. He placed the gun gently back on the table and listened. Jasper moved closer to the window. From there, he could clearly see someone dancing just outside his front door. He was not the kind of man who enjoyed unnecessary attention. True to his quiet nature, he had never hired security guards, nor installed any cameras. His door stood unguarded, exactly as he preferred it. Left to his own will, he would have ignored the woman spinning wildly in the night, dismissing her as another ghost conjured by his sleepless mind. Yet curiosity, that treacherous whispering thing, won the battle tonight. Chapter 3. He locked his bedroom door, descended the stairs slowly, and noticed how the dim lights along the steps flickered with each movement, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Somehow, she had managed to slip into the garden. Her shadow danced behind the iron bars, her fingers tracing the cold metal as she moved. Jasper watched, half intrigued, half unsettled. There was something deliberate in her movements, something almost choreographed. She must have found his address online, Or perhaps she had simply followed the music of the night. Either way, she was clearly a fan. Was she dancing to impress him, to be noticed? If so, she was succeeding, though not quite in the way she might have hoped. Jasper was not a man easily swayed by beauty. It was the mind that fascinated him, not the face. Only a clever woman could handle a foolish man like himself. And clever women, he mused bitterly, had grown rare in this world. He decided at last to greet her, to offer at the very least a polite hello. He gripped the cold handle and pushed the heavy iron door open. The hinges groaned in protest. The sound startled her slightly, for she stopped dancing and turned toward him. Jasper opened his mouth to speak, but the young woman spoke first. Her voice was bright, breathless with excitement. "Sir," she said softly, "may I tell you something strange? I wanted to see your house, to look around. I've never discovered where a famous person lives, nor have I ever met one," Amelia said, her voice carrying both shyness and curiosity. "If you give me this chance, I might just end up being grateful to you for the rest of my life." She let out a quiet, almost secretive laugh after speaking. There was something tenderly absurd about her words. Standing before a man several years older, someone she'd only heard stories about, she couldn't help but smile. Jasper, however, understood that smile far too well. He knew what it meant, to wear that restless joy like a fragile disguise. People like her, he thought, never truly stopped searching. And he, who had long been consumed by his own dependencies and regrets, had no intention of being anyone's savior anymore. Gratitude had become a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Amelia silenced the noise inside her head, forcing herself to listen again. "Oh, of course," Jasper replied, his voice polite but uneasy. Realizing how curt he sounded, he made a small gesture with his hand, almost as if to soften the moment. But by then, Amelia had already taken a step toward the door. Still, when her silhouette disappeared into the misty street, her image lingered, like a ghost of warmth against Jasper's cold, melancholic gaze. "I'm sure you would be grateful," he murmured to himself. "But who wouldn't be? If I were someone else, I suppose I'd be grateful too." He exhaled deeply, a long, weary breath that seemed to carry the weight of years. There were moments he wished he could show her, the ones that existed only in his mind. But memories cannot be photographed. You can't capture what you haven't yet dared to feel again. After a while, Mr. Jasper lifted his head and frowned slightly. The young woman stood before him, her face softened by the dim light. He tried to study her expression, but the darkness blurred the lines between them, like a half-forgotten dream. Everything about it felt strangely unreal. Despite his fame, Jasper often felt like an intruder in his own story. Hollywood had once adored him, yet lately even his reflection felt like someone else's memory. As he lingered in that silence, a thought passed through his mind. Brief but sharp, like the shadow of an old danger, he could not stop her from coming any closer. After all, the young woman who had appeared in the night might have been hiding some kind of lethal weapon beneath that knee-length black dress. Truth be told, knowing that made his private dream of death feel suddenly easier to fulfill. The very notion of it both tempted and terrified him. Mr. Jasper swallowed audibly, and not long after, spoke again. "Very well. May I tell you something even stranger?" he said. "Yes." "Of course you may," she answered. Without hesitation, she slipped her arm through his, and as if drawn by habit, he turned and led her toward the ornate gates of his million-dollar home. For the first time in years, Jasper felt genuine indifference. In that odd, luminous instant, this strange stranger had rescued him from becoming merely remembered as the Hollywood actor who put a gun to his head, the broken dream, the faded celebrity whose hopes had been smashed. Even if he died an hour from now, it would not feel like a great loss. At least before leaving, he might have made one person happy, steered someone toward their dreams. Maybe, perhaps, that alone would be enough to win him the heaven those solemn men from the church kept promising. Chapter 4. Amelia slipped soundlessly through the enormous doors, unsure of what awaited her on the other side. The only thing she knew for certain was that whatever it was, it no longer frightened her. The tremor that had once ruled her heart had quieted now, replaced by an uncanny stillness, like a newborn seeing light for the first time, or a soul rediscovering the world after too many years in the dark. From her vantage point, she could already see Jasper without needing to move any closer. He appeared unexpectedly calm, almost serene. And Amelia couldn't help but think that if their roles had been reversed, she would have acted just as he did, collected on the surface, yet quietly bracing for what might come. Stepping into the garden felt like crossing into another realm entirely. The air shimmered faintly, filled with the scent of damp earth and ancient flowers. Trees of every kind arched above her like guardians, their leaves whispering secrets she could almost understand. For a moment, just a fleeting, impossible moment, she felt as though she had wandered into heaven itself. She wanted to leave, to turn around and escape before the illusion dissolved, but her feet refused to obey. Something about the place, about him, pulled her forward, softly, irresistibly. "I was certain your home would be magnificent," she said finally, her voice trembling with both wonder and disbelief. "But I never imagined it would feel so alive, so far removed from the rest of the world." Jasper turned to her then, his gaze heavy yet gentle, the kind of look only a man who had spent too long in silence could wear. After Amelia finished speaking, she caught the man's gaze, his eyes fixed directly on hers, deep and unflinching. Jasper didn't wait long to reply. "If you believe this place is some kind of wonderland," he said with a faint, knowing smile, "then I suppose that makes you the famous Alice." Amelia was taken aback by his words. For a brief moment she froze. Her eyes darted away, landing instead on the imitation roses nearby, her cheeks burning with a shy embarrassment. "Oh, I don't think I could ever be Alice, sir," she whispered. "Wasn't Alice supposed to be blonde? And besides, with the dark life I've been dragged through, I doubt I could ever be anyone like her." Her voice trembled softly, as if she was half speaking to herself. Jasper noticed the quiet strength hidden beneath her fragile tone, and for the first time in days, the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. "Well," Jasper said after a short silence, "if you're not Alice, then maybe this isn't Wonderland either. Sometimes things just aren't as they seem, that's all." They both fell quiet again. For a long moment, they simply stood side by side, breathing in the faint silver light of the moon. It was as though time itself had paused, the world holding its breath just for them. To them, this was what life's philosophy came down to: savor the moment and leave the rest to God. As they continued walking under the pale glow of the moon, Jasper turned his head slightly toward her. "Why don't you tell me a bit about yourself?" he murmured. Jasper wasn't the kind of man who liked to talk much, but tonight was different. Something in him wanted to keep speaking, to bridge the silence. He wanted to know who she really was, this woman who had suddenly entered his quiet, forgotten life. As they spoke, they kept walking side by side, their shadows stretching faintly under the pale light of the moon. Jasper stopped for a brief moment and turned toward Amelia. "How about telling me something about yourself?" Mr. Jasper murmured softly. He wasn't usually the kind of man who enjoyed talking much, but for some reason, tonight felt different. For the first time in a long while, he wanted to speak, really speak, and listen. He wanted to know who this woman beside him truly was. What kind of cold wind had carried her here, in the middle of the night, he wondered. Jasper had always prided himself on reading people as if they were open books, yet something about Amelia defied the pages, something he couldn't quite name. "So you wish to know more about me, Mr. Jasper?" she asked gently. Then she clasped her hands around her arms. She must have been cold. December always carried its own kind of chill here. "For instance, name. Everyone has one, doesn't they? A name that's good or bad, loved or hated." Mr. Jasper paused for a moment, swallowing hard before speaking again. "But before that," he murmured, "if you'll allow me, I'd like to take you somewhere. A place with a view I think you'll like. It's quite beautiful, and much warmer than here." "Just follow me and stay close," Jasper added, his voice quick and uneasy, as if finishing the conversation might let him run away from something he feared. Amelia couldn't quite understand his restlessness. Why did he always move as though standing still would hurt him? His haste had never done him any good. When Amelia saw Jasper beginning to vanish into the dimness, she instinctively ran after him, her steps hurried and uneven. He walked fast, too fast, and she struggled to catch up. Her breath caught painfully in her chest, and within seconds her face had turned bright red, like an overfilled balloon. Trying to speak while gasping for air, she said between short breaths, "I don't know if you can even hear me, but since you asked earlier, my name's Amelia. And just so you know, Amelia is about to die right here." Bending forward, resting her hands on her knees, she panted like a small, tired puppy. Mr. Jasper, she gasped, half laughing, if you don't want this beautiful mansion of yours turning into a crime scene tonight, I'd suggest you stop walking for a moment. She stopped, catching her breath again. Otherwise, I'll die right here, from pure exhaustion. Jasper seemed unfazed by what Amelia had just said, as if her words had dissolved before they could reach him. But should he have cared, truly? From a distance, a faint whisper reached Amelia's ear. Be patient, young Amelia, murmured Jasper, his voice carried by the wind. Just a few more steps and you'll reach paradise. The words tangled with the breeze, breaking apart into a low, haunting murmur before fading into the night. Still, hearing her name spoken, even once, made her strangely glad. It was a rare thing, after all, for someone to learn it by chance. Rare things never came easily in life. And Amelia, with that small, knowing smile, alive. Chapter 5. Just as Jasper had said, after running only a few more meters, Amelia reached the end of the narrow path that resembled a forgotten trail. And yet, there was nothing here. Nothing but herself. The only company she had were the distant, unsettling cries of owls echoing through the night, eerie sounds that seemed to mock her solitude. She was angry with herself for letting Mr. Jasper slip out of sight. It seemed that the only companion she would have for the rest of this night was the darkness itself, the endless black of the sky above. Well, she could accept that, couldn't she? All she had to do was turn back, follow the same narrow, stony path, and she would eventually reach the exit gate. Yes, it all sounded so simple. At least that's what she thought, just as the idea whispered faintly in her mind. But the moment she turned to retrace her steps, her vision began to fade. The world dimmed until even the faint light she had been following disappeared. It was as though she had been sentenced to eternal darkness. Still, her mind remained awake, strangely calm, almost too calm, as if reason itself refused to surrender. Surely this couldn't be death. Her eyes might have darkened, but she hadn't fainted. She was still standing, wide-eyed, breathing, caught between consciousness and something far deeper. She stood there, trembling, her voice rising as she tried to drown out the panic clawing at her chest. Damn it! Turn the lights on! If you're going to kill me, at least do it with the lights on! I hate the dark, she cried. The darkness pressed against her like a living thing, cold, heavy, endless. Even imagining being buried in that blackness was unbearable. Amelia had half expected some cruel reply, but the silence that followed was even worse. Oh, how delightful, she heard someone murmur softly, almost amused. Everything is going exactly as I planned. Don't worry, I'd never kill you. The voice that echoed next wasn't her own. It was Jasper's. Oh my God, Mr. Jasper, is that you? Please, help me, Amelia cried out. She could hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, followed by the steady rhythm of breathing. Her mind told her to run, but something in his voice, distant, calm, almost tender, kept her frozen where she stood. Finally, with trembling fingers, she reached her hand toward the darkness. Amelia hated uncertainty, and now she was standing right in the heart of it. Was she waiting to die, or to live? Or was there a third possibility, something she couldn't even name? Then she felt it, strong hands far more powerful than her own, gripping her arms. Jasper's hands. With one swift motion, he pulled her closer, forcing her to take a few hesitant steps toward him. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. What are you trying to do? Nothing, Jasper replied calmly, almost contentedly. Absolutely nothing. I'm only trying to make you walk, Jasper murmured, his tone quiet but deliberate. To make you walk through the darkness, it's that hard? What is it that's so hard, Mr. Jasper? Amelia asked softly. She had always found it oddly tempting to ask questions whose answers she already knew. Moving forward in the dark, he said, taking step after step without being able to see what's ahead. That's what my life has been, walking without light. You were probably going to ask what it's like, weren't you? Well, now you don't need to ask. I've shown you. I've let you live it. Amelia managed only a faint, wistful smile. The man standing before her seemed made of ice, a man who had long since abandoned whatever warmth he once possessed. I'm sorry for dragging you into it, Jasper murmured again, this time his voice colder, more detached. Perhaps he simply didn't like the way fear flickered in her eyes. Turn on the lights, he commanded suddenly, his tone sharp and absolute. If anyone else had heard him, they might have thought Mr. Jasper unbearably arrogant, and perhaps he truly was. God only knows. Within seconds, the garden was once again bathed in light. Amelia blinked against the sudden brightness, realizing how wrong she'd been. This vast garden wasn't empty after all. It only felt that way. Jasper's gaze dropped to the watch on his wrist. Time had slipped away far more than he had planned. He looked as though he could feel every passing second, as if time itself were something fragile and precious, crumbling in his hands. "Well then," he said at last, voice calm yet tinged with urgency. "Shall we keep going? Heaven awaits us, and we wouldn't want to be late." Chapter 6. "Oh, that's exactly what was missing," Amelia murmured to herself. "A house this enormous simply must have a winter garden, don't you think?" Jasper had brought her to what was perhaps the most exquisite part of his home, the conservatory. It was clear that every corner of it had been arranged with great care, every detail chosen with intention. The place carried an air of quiet perfection, as if it had been prepared not just for the season, but for someone special. Through the glass ceiling, Amelia could see the sky spread out endlessly above them. Thanks to the fireplace burning nearby, the room felt far warmer and far more alive than she had expected. "You keep surprising me, Amelia," Jasper said, his voice calm yet faintly teasing. "It isn't easy to surprise me." A hint of amusement touched his face, lingering just long enough to make her heartbeat quicken. "Then I shall take great pride in that, sir," she murmured back, a small smile playing on her lips. Before moving to Hollywood, Amelia had read something about Mr. Jasper in a gossip column, an article claiming he'd grown heavier, slower, burdened by time and reputation. But as she looked at him now, none of that seemed true. Jasper looked strikingly alive, even youthful. His dark brown hair, neatly swept back, caught the firelight in soft glints of copper. Every gesture of his carried quiet confidence, not arrogance, the kind of ease that comes from knowing exactly who you are. The expression shaped by his high cheekbones was flawless. His brows and eyes, sharp, deliberate, seemed as if drawn by the tip of a pencil. He wore a cream-colored suit that fit him perfectly, looking as though he were heading somewhere important. Somewhere sacred, perhaps. Jasper placed 2 dusty bottles of wine on the wooden coffee table before Amelia, along with an already waiting wine glass. "You can drink as you wish," he said quietly. "Make yourself at home." There was something humble in the way Jasper spoke to her, despite the grandeur surrounding them. "I'm sure I'll be comfortable enough to do so, thank you," Amelia replied, her tones soft but poised. Mr. Jasper, however, seemed to prefer whiskey, pouring himself a glass instead. Amelia drew her glass closer, her fingertips brushing the smooth surface as if testing its temperature. She grasped the neck of the wine bottle gently, filling her glass halfway before lifting it, and noticed the faint, approving smile that played on Jasper's lips. "I only hope the reason you're drinking so comfortably isn't just the topic itself," Jasper murmured, eyes fixed on her. Amelia didn't respond immediately. She simply took a sip, then wiped her lips delicately with the back of her hand. "I've already forgotten about my clothes," she said with a half laugh, glancing down at the bottle she was still holding. It was already halfway empty. She hadn't even realized. "Do you know him, Mr. Jasper?" Amelia asked after a pause, curiosity breaking through the warmth of the moment. "My God, what kind of question is that?" Jasper let out a low chuckle. "A man like you hardly has anyone he doesn't know in this world." Amelia felt a faint throb behind her temples, the kind that comes when thoughts grow too heavy. Her mind was full and yet strangely empty, too burdened to carry her own endless imaginings. "There's one person, though," Jasper murmured then, his voice quieter, darker, almost to himself. Jasper raised his glass in a quiet toast to Amelia. "Who is that unlucky soul?" Amelia said, meeting his eyes. "Anyone who hasn't met you must be terribly unlucky." "I've never met God," Jasper replied softly. He sounded as if he were naming something he had long stopped expecting. For a moment, Amelia set her glass down and fell silent. Then, almost as if confessing, she whispered, "I've never met him either. God has never seen me." "Perhaps," Jasper murmured, his gaze drifting to some distant place. "Perhaps God is very great, and we are so small that he cannot see us." They simply looked at one another then, 2 people who shared much in this world. The shadows of pain and sorrow had followed them both all their lives. Neither had ever truly escaped them. Chapter 7. Amelia set the empty wine bottle down on the table with a sharp, echoing thud. "Mr. Jasper," she began, her voice trembling like a secret trying to escape. I know this may sound strange, but earlier outside, you said you'd never kill me. Why is that? Why wouldn't you? Do you see me as someone not even worth killing?" She was already drunk, but it wasn't the wine clouding her thoughts. It was him. It was hard to understand, even for herself, but Jasper had become the first man she had ever truly respected, and the thought of embarrassing herself before him terrified her more than death itself. The very idea of leaving him made her stomach twist. After everything that had happened, the last thing she wanted was to walk away from this, whatever this was. Jasper exhaled softly, his sigh breaking the silence like a slow-moving shadow. His gaze lifted to the ceiling, where the dim light shimmered across the glass above. His face was unreadable, carved somewhere between weariness and longing. "I wouldn't kill you, Amelia," he said at last, his voice a low murmur that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "Because when I leave this world, I wouldn't want to take hell with me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. His words lingered in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. That was enough for her. Without a sound, Amelia raised her eyes to the ceiling, following the same invisible point Jasper was staring at. A pale light glowed faintly above them, brushing against his face, soft, distant, almost divine. "You know, Mr. Jasper," Amelia said, her voice calm yet trembling beneath its own honesty, "I don't think we're that different, you and I. I believe I'd actually enjoy killing you." For a heartbeat, she expected him to explode, his fury to rise, his restraint to break, his voice to demand that she leave at once. But instead, Jasper laughed. He laughed so freely that the sound filled the room like sunlight through dusty glass. A sound Amelia imagined hadn't touched him in years, perhaps not since those long-forgotten winters he once spent in his family's glass garden. "So," Jasper murmured, still smiling faintly, "why would you want to kill me, Amelia? Aren't you afraid of going to hell?" Amelia lifted her head from where it rested against the couch and met his gaze. "Because I don't believe in hell, Mr. Jasper," she said simply. "You mentioned heaven a moment ago," he replied, his tone darkly amused. "If there's a heaven, then there must also be a hell. And if you believe in one, you must accept the other." Amelia reached for the second bottle of wine, then froze halfway, her fingers curling back. "There is one," she said softly, "but it isn't what you think. Hell isn't the name they gave it. And besides," she gave a faint, tired smile, "we're already in it." Now Jasper's interest truly stirred. For the first time, he leaned forward, eyes narrowing with something close to curiosity. "So tell me then, little lady," he murmured, "what's its real name?" "Earth," Amelia answered. "Everyone calls it hell, but its real name is Earth. The place people fear, the one they imagine burns forever, has always been here. We call it the world. We live in it, and we pretend we're alive. But if this is where the lost come to wander, then I suppose I have nothing left to lose." He looked at Amelia as though he had just noticed the flame burning behind her calm gaze. "You know, Amelia," he murmured, pouring himself another glass of whiskey, "I think you were sent into this world to be a poet." "I don't think so, sir," Amelia replied softly. "My dreams are a little different. I suppose I wanted to be an actress." Her voice came out metallic this time, steady but edged with something fragile. "But don't think I wanted it for fame or wealth," she added quickly. "I just want to leave something behind in this world. A mark. Something so real and vast that no one else would ever dare to reach it." Jasper's expression darkened with quiet admiration. His long fingers brushed through his disheveled hair, absently tracing thoughts he hadn't yet spoken. "A mark," he repeated, almost in a whisper. For a while, neither of them spoke. Only the crackling of the fire filled the silence, and the world outside seemed to vanish. Jasper could almost hear the soft hum of his own thoughts swirling restlessly inside his head, like ideas trying to find their way out. "You know," he said at last, standing up with sudden determination, "I think I can do it. I think I can actually make it happen." He rose abruptly from the worn armchair, as if some invisible force had pulled him to his feet. Crossing the room in quick strides, he reached the old four-drawer cabinet beside the fireplace. There was something almost feverish about the way he moved, as though a revelation had just struck him, brilliant and unstoppable. He pulled the first drawer open, empty. Then the next, still nothing. His movements grew sharper, more desperate. "Damn it, where is it?" he muttered, pressing a trembling hand to his forehead. He had been searching for the antique camera, his grandmother's, the one he hadn't touched since the day she died, He was certain it was here, somewhere close. And yet, no matter how many drawers he opened, it refused to appear. "Damn it all! Proof of how stupid I can be!" he shouted, his voice echoing against the wooden walls. And then, all at once, memory returned. The camera, the bedroom, the quiet corner by the bed where he had left it hours ago. He knew he had to go alone. If young Amelia were to walk into Jasper's room and see the guns and strange instruments of death lying there in plain sight, she would flee in terror. The last thing Jasper needed was the swarm of filthy reporters sniffing around his doorstep by morning. If he didn't want to wake up to find his name on the front page of every tabloid, he had to handle this himself. "Amelia," he said quietly, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. "I'll leave you here for just 10 minutes. Don't follow me. Don't even think about it. You know how much attention I've been drawing lately, and the last thing I want is to get caught by the press with you." With that, Jasper shut the door firmly behind him, and the sound echoed like a final breath. Then he vanished into the darkness. Amelia's eyes fixed on the clock hanging on the wall. It had been only a few minutes since Jasper disappeared, yet the seconds dragged like hours. The ticking grew louder with every beat of her heart, filling the silent room with a kind of ghostly rhythm. She hated how lost she felt without him. The thought of falling asleep somewhere and never waking again haunted her more than she wanted to admit. How long could her mind circle the same dark thoughts before they devoured her whole? Maybe she needed to do something, anything, to make the time pass faster. A little mischief never hurt anyone, right? Besides, a house like this had to be full of secrets, waiting to be found. She rose to her feet, determination flickering behind her eyes. If Jasper could leave her alone here, then she could at least explore what he was hiding. Every locked drawer, every shadowed corner, it was all calling to her. She started opening drawers one by one. Inside were things she had never owned and never would: jewels, gold pieces, small treasures that gleamed even in the faint light. Her fingers lingered on them for a moment, until she caught a glimpse of something far more unsettling. A pair of eyes stared back at her from the mirror. Her breath caught. It took her a second to realize the reflection wasn't someone else. It was herself. She was staring straight into her own eyes, yet something in that reflection felt different, almost alive, as if it were watching her from the other side. Amelia froze, still holding a small jewel in her hands, unable to tear her gaze away from the mirror. She saw how the crimson jewels suited her perfectly, so much that they almost seemed to belong to her. Yet no matter how dazzling they looked, Amelia didn't want them. With a wave of remorse, she placed the precious stones back in their velvet box. The act itself filled her with disgust, as though she had betrayed something inside her. She was just about to sink back into her stiff chair when the sudden creak of the door startled her. Facing someone as renowned as Jasper, she refused to appear small. She fixed a wide, practiced smile on her face, one that hid more than it revealed, and turned slowly, pretending she hadn't been caught off guard. "For heaven's sake, Mr. Jasper, where have you been?" "I nearly died waiting," she exclaimed. Like an inexperienced thief relieved not to be caught, she silently thanked God for it, perhaps for the 100th time. When Jasper turned toward her, both his hands were full of something radiant. In his right hand, he held a soft, blush-pink gown, long enough to sweep the floor. The sleeves were trimmed with delicate white lace, the kind that looked almost too fragile for this world. The moment he saw Amelia, he fell in love with her all over again. In his left hand, he held tightly to an old Zenith camera, likely from the 60s, gripping it as if it were the only thing anchoring him to reality. Amelia rolled her eyes and raised one eyebrow. "Are we starting this again, Mr. Jasper? Another life lesson wrapped in one of your empathy stories?" Before finishing her sentence, she sighed and dropped onto the chair. He leaned slightly closer, his voice low and steady. "Didn't you once say you wanted to leave a mark on this world, my beautiful Amelia?" he murmured. "Of course I do, sir. You're my only reason to stay in it," she replied, without hesitation. Jasper's gaze deepened, carrying that rare kind of devotion that makes time itself slow. "Then let me carve your name at the very top of the world," he said softly, so deep that not even on the world's last day could anyone, not even God, erase it. He lifted the camera gently, almost ceremoniously. "But before you answer," he continued, "I want us to be photographed together. Put on the dress I brought for you, and stand beside me. When they look back at this era, Amelia, they'll know us as the king and queen of our time." Chapter 8. From the very first moment Amelia put on the dress, she carried herself with the elegance of a queen, turning again and again to admire the way it flowed around her. "Stop spinning before you make yourself dizzy, Amelia," Jasper murmured restlessly. "There are a few details we need to talk about." That night, Amelia felt a familiar lightheadedness, but this time it wasn't from alcohol. It was from the happiness that filled her entirely. "What kind of details, sir?" she asked, her tone playful yet curious, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the lacework on her gown. "Amelia, weren't you the one who once complained that God no longer sees us?" Jasper said, his voice growing fervent. "Isn't that so?" He spoke with such intensity that his face flushed red in an instant. "Yes, Mr. Jasper," said Amelia softly, "but I don't quite understand what you truly mean." Jasper bent down before her, resting on his knees, his eyes glinting with something both holy and mad. "Amelia, this is a perfect chance to show ourselves to God," he whispered. Amelia opened her mouth to speak, but Jasper didn't let her. "Don't talk. Just listen to me. I know I'm being hasty. I was going to wait, but I can't anymore." His hands closed tightly around her arms, gripping her with such force that it hurt. "We're going to perform a great play before the eyes of the world and of God, Amelia. The whole world will watch us, thinking we're only actors in a grand theater. But we'll be playing the truest roles of all, the ones written in blood and soul." Amelia winced. He realized he was hurting her, loosened his grip, and stepped back. She now looked at him with furrowed brows. The trust she'd once felt for him seemed to vanish in that single moment. "What kind of play is this?" she asked quietly. "Like Romeo and Juliet?" Jasper gazed at her, struck once again by how innocent she still was. "Amelia, the first rule: forget everything you think you know. Every man you've ever met might one day offer you the same proposal." He paused, a faint smile curling at his lips. "But I offer you something far more extraordinary." He looked straight into her eyes. "Will you die with me, Amelia?" Chapter 9. Amelia sat curled up where she was, a small, tangled thing. She wanted to speak, truly she did, but the words would not come. Perhaps she simply could not find the right ones. Jasper moved quietly to her side and laid his head against her shoulder. All he wanted was to be, for a moment, a reason for her to hope. Soon Jasper had arrived at the same conviction he had long felt about himself. Amelia, too, did not belong to this world. They no longer had any reasons to remain here. If anything, they needed to prepare and go together to cross from this life into eternity. He had told Amelia every thought that crowded his mind. The plan itself was almost disturbingly simple. Jasper would stage a single magnificent performance in the nation's grandest theater, a final advantage bestowed by his fame. That evening the theater would be full. Hundreds would sit in the same hall, unaware. And of course, the leading roles would belong to Jasper Wood and Amelia. For the audience, the ending was something they could easily foresee. They had watched this kind of story play out countless times throughout their lives. The old, familiar tragedy of love bound by the cruel limits of the world. A young woman and the hopeless dreamer who adored her. From the very moment they understood they could never belong here, they began searching for another place, a world where they might finally be free. And so, hand in hand, they welcomed death, as though it were not an ending at all, but a doorway. Some would call it a sad ending. Others might see it as the beginning of something purer, a rebirth wrapped in sorrow. But for Jasper, it was neither. For him, it was the only truth left, a way to cross beyond the boundaries of this false world, to step into one that was finally their own, a new order, a new set of rules, untouched by illusion. The audience adored Jasper and Amelia. They would watch with tears in their eyes, believing it was only a performance, that when the lights dimmed and the curtain fell, the actors would rise again, smiling and bowing, alive as ever. They would clap, thinking they had just witnessed another great show. But Jasper had prepared something far greater. This time, there would be no curtain call. This time, the stage itself would shatter under the weight of truth. When the curtain rose again, all the hidden horrors of the world, the lies, the masks, the fragile illusions, would finally come to light. It would be an ending no one expected, one that would leave them breathless. For this time, the people would not be watching a play. They would be watching the real thing. Jasper Wood and his luminous Amelia meeting the end together, not in fiction, but in life itself. And when the curtain opened, the world would witness their final act, their living death. and realized too late that the story had never been make-believe. "That will be enough for one night," said Mr. Jasper quietly. "My assistant will be waiting for you outside. Albert will take you somewhere safe to stay, and he won't leave your side until he's certain you're secure. There's nothing to worry about." Amelia could see the outline of an elderly man waiting patiently by the gate, his frail shadow flickering against the glass, stretching thin under the dim light. Before she left, Amelia turned to look at Mr. Jasper one last time. She didn't know if it would be their final meeting, but deep inside, she knew she would never meet another man like him again, a man who had once asked her to die with him. Men like that do not come twice in a lifetime. "Good night, Mr. Jasper," she whispered at last. Without waiting for him to answer, she quickly swung her bag over her shoulder and slipped through the door. Her figure disappeared into the night, quietly, completely. And though the world still held her somewhere beyond that door, for Jasper, she was already gone. Amelia's steps moved slowly along the path that resembled an old footrail. Compared with a few hours earlier, she had become markedly slower. Each step felt heavier, as if her body had suddenly grown too much for her legs. A few paces ahead walked the elderly man Jasper had assigned to accompany her. Amelia broke the silence at last. "Sir, I thought we might go by car. Am I mistaken in thinking Mr. Jasper would mind if I rode in his fine automobile? Or is he worried I might, well, make a mess of it?" Her voice tried for lightness, but it trembled. The old man stopped, startled, and turned toward her as if afraid he had failed in some duty. "Oh no, my dear. What makes you think such a thing? Be assured Mr. Jasper would never behave that way." He paused to catch his breath, his age evident in the hush of his tone. "He is a most gracious and generous man," he went on. Amelia smiled inwardly. The thought crossed her that perhaps the man earned a small fee for singing Jasper's praises. "And look, here we are. What do you think, young lady?" "Isn't it enchanting?" the man asked, pointing with a wrinkled finger toward the distant house lights. Amelia followed his gesture, her pupils widened at the sight. "How I wish I were as fortunate as you," the man murmured. "This room we're about to enter, this is the most treasured chamber of the whole estate." Amelia swallowed. Words failed her. "Do not take me in a material sense," he hastened to add. "What makes this room precious is not its furnishings, but the fact that its key is hidden in Mr. Jasper's heart. Only those who have stolen his heart may enter." That night, Amelia felt special in a way she had never known before. A curious warmth settled over her, an odd exhilaration and a tremor of dread. How many had stood where she did? How many of them had walked away? The question nudged at her mind like a small, insistent shadow. The servant murmured, "And until now, only one woman has ever slept in that room, the Honorable Julia Wood, Mr. Jasper's beloved wife." At the sound of it, Amelia felt her heart pound as if it would leap right out of her chest. "Please, tell Jasper Wood. 1,000 thanks for this unequaled and extraordinarily intimate invitation," Amelia whispered, hardly believing her own words. Then, with her left hand, she set the black high-heeled shoe she had been clutching down hard on the floor. The sharp click of heel against wood echoed for a few seconds in the quiet. It rang in her and in the old man's ears. Amelia adjusted the shoes with her toes and, in a single quick motion, slipped them back onto her feet. "But, sir, look, I am not what you think. I don't need anyone's charity. I'm not living on the street. I have a place to stay. Besides, my head is a mess," she added, voice wobbling. The gentle servant cut her off softly. "Of course you're not living in the streets, dear Amelia. That's only a part of it," he said. "You must accept it as part of what you are to do. After all, is not everything in life made of parts? Be careful, Miss Amelia. Keep each fragment of every moment you live safe inside your mind, and whatever happens, never lose them." Amelia seemed to understand the old man's meaning. She even looked convinced. He withdrew his fingertips from her brow, and, with a tenderness that surprised her, laid them for a moment against her forehead. "For you can never know which one of those pieces will turn out to be the one that completes you." Chapter 10. Amelia tried to resist the sleep pressing heavily against her eyelids, but she already knew it was pointless. Caught in the claws of drowsiness, she realized she was destined to lose this quiet battle. She sat motionless in the middle of her soft bed, her body folded into itself, like a fragile secret she could no longer keep. Once again, solitude found her, and this time it felt almost intimate. When her gaze wandered around the room, She saw perfection in every corner. Everything was flawlessly arranged. Yet to her, all that beauty was meaningless, like a stage left standing after the play had ended. And perhaps that was why staying in Jasper Wood's late wife's room brought an inexplicable guilt that settled deep within her chest. Yes, she shouldn't have felt guilty. Poor girl. But every time she did, a strange ache bloomed in the hollow of her stomach, a pain she could never quite name. And now, that ache was there again, alive and insistent. She already missed her home, Amelia realized. She knew well that her humble house could never compete with this grandeur, and yet, what did elegance mean when it only echoed her loneliness? Amelia's eyes caught the paintings on the wall again. She imagined the woman in the portrait staring back at her with quiet accusation, her gaze heavy, unrelenting. The thought gnawed at Amelia's mind until sleep finally claimed her. She knew everything would go silent once she drifted off. That peace would come only then, in the stillness between one heartbeat and the next. In her dream, she found herself surrendering to happiness, falling gently into its waiting arms. Jasper had dreamed like this once too, though his life had been haunted by nightmares, endlessly looping, night after night. But that night felt different. For the first time in years, he had seen something resembling a dream again. Deep within his mind, Jasper watched his imagined reunion with Amelia, the moment they would finally meet again in the light. For him, that was all a happy ending ever meant. To rise with the one he loved into eternity, to never look back, to shed the exhaustion of existence itself, and leap, unafraid, toward the only thing that still felt worth the risk. Chapter 11. Good morning, lovely Amelia. Did you sleep well, I wonder? Mr. Jasper murmured softly, almost as if speaking to a dream. Amelia slowly parted her eyelids, her gaze wandering across the unfamiliar room. The sun had long risen. It must have been near noon. Until this morning, she had never awakened anywhere but her own home. Oh, dear God, Mr. Jasper, what on earth are you doing here? Her voice quivered, carrying both surprise and a trace of fear. Oh, forgive me. How unspeakably rude of me. Jasper Wood placed the carefully prepared breakfast tray at the edge of the bed, his every movement trembling with restrained courtesy. I ought to have known better than to enter a lady's chamber unannounced. Please, do pardon me. Amelia brushed her eyes with the palm of her hand, as if trying to wipe away the haze of confusion. Then, without another word, she reached for the half-filled glass of whiskey, resting beside the breakfast tray, her fingers curling around it with quiet defiance. It's quite all right, sir, she said, her tone suddenly steady, almost detached. There's no need for regret. A single glass of whiskey, after all, is enough to make me forget everything. I brought you breakfast. Honestly, I would have preferred a more pleasant setting for breakfast with you, but you know how pressed for time we both are. Also, I brought a little whiskey. On days like this, staying sober does nobody any good, does it? Amelia took a large bite of the jam-covered bread laid out for her. If you ask me, I had no idea we were in such a hurry, sir. Before Jasper could begin to speak, he turned toward the door he'd left open, closed it with a single movement, and then came back to stand beside her. I woke early and visited a few places, he said. While Jasper continued, Amelia popped the last piece of jam bread into her mouth. I know it may sound sudden, but you must understand, our time is far more limited than we imagined, Amelia. If we've agreed on this, we must finish it at once. Jasper's words came out so low and hushed that they were barely a whisper, as if he feared the room itself might overhear them. That is why I ordered 2 coffins and gave my assistants instructions to arrange countless funeral flowers, so that everything will be ready in 2 days' time. Don't worry, they will never know for whom all of this is being prepared. Amelia coughed loudly, as though the words they'd just swallowed had lodged in her throat. Mr. Jasper, are you telling me you came to announce my funeral will be in 2 days? The young woman rocked her head from side to side, as though the idea she'd heard were a mistake. Please don't call it a funeral. Remember, think of it as our salvation performance, Amelia. The words tumbled quickly from Jasper's mouth. His fingers drifted gently through a strand of her hair. Look here, sir. We only met last night, and now you tell me I have only 2 days left to die with you? Amelia straightened and rose to her feet. Everything I told you last night was true. Look, I can't claim I had a perfect life, but to just die like that, don't you think it's a little too much? Too much? Jasper echoed. He too sprang up as abruptly as Amelia had. Do you know what's too much? It's us. We are far too much for this damned world, Jasper added. Look at your life, Amelia. My God, no one else values you like I do. You are no different from a corpse. Jasper's words made Amelia's tears spill, within seconds, down the rims of her eyes like raindrops. What truly saddened her was not merely Jasper's phrasing. It was that all those humiliating words reflected a truth. The famous man standing before her had, with a single motion, struck the whole reality of his life across Amelia's face. Jasper wiped the tears from Amelia's cheek and hugged her tightly. I will never leave you, not even in death. We will die together, and most importantly, we will be remembered together. Amelia inhaled deeply, holding that breath as if to trap it inside her forever, never to release it. You may never have stood on a stage in your life, but you will die on one. And beside me, Jasper murmured. After a time, a silence like a cold wave settled over them both. That deadly stillness allowed no conversation. Each minute they did speak, however, made them feel as if they were learning one another more deeply. Thus they came to understand one another better. Amelia suddenly lifted her head from Jasper's shoulder. Very well then, sir, I accept. On the day of your death in 2 days, I will accompany you, she said. Jasper's expression did not change in the slightest at Amelia's answer. It was as if he had known all along that she would accept his offer. He had read the young woman like a book, unraveling her weaknesses in no time. And now, having understood her completely, he had already placed her back on the shelf, to gather dust among the forgotten pages of history. Chapter 12. Everything will be flawless, exactly as it should be, Amelia. Trust me. I've already booked the theater for the performance that only the two of us will take part in, Mr. Jasper said. Amelia noticed his voice had taken on a very metallic tone. Just then the light on the phone in Jasper's pocket blinked several times in quick succession. He took the phone, slid the lock swiftly to the left, and every fiber of Jasper Wood made it plain that he had received the welcome news. Even before he spoke, the corners of his mouth had begun to lift. The long-awaited good news, Jasper cried out in delight. Amelia, still astonished, continued to watch him with wide eyes. Most of the tickets are already sold. Can you see? People are paying fortunes to watch our deaths. Even before the news spreads, Amelia, it's unbelievable. Amelia didn't know how to answer him. Since she was a child, she had prayed to God to become a well-known actress. She had always wanted to be on stage, but to die on stage was not exactly the sort of thing one dreams of. Amelia knew that one day she would die. What difference would it make if it happened in 2 days? Besides, hundreds would witness the deaths of the famous Jasper Wood and of herself. No doubt reporters in the city and around the world would run breathless, hour-long dispatches about their mysterious, horrifying end. Amelia imagined their names splashed across the entertainment pages. Even after years had passed, no one would be able to blot this traumatic death from their memory. The young woman had reclaimed every scrap of hope she had ever lost. No one would dare to erase her name from the top of the world. Chapter 14, the day of the performance. The theater, bathed in the glow of gold, held its breath. At the very center of the stage stood Amelia and Jasper, silent, motionless, suspended between time and eternity. They said nothing. Words were too small for what trembled between them. They simply looked at one another, as though their gaze could hold back the inevitable. Both knew this was the last time, the last glance, the last heartbeat they would ever share beneath this world's light. All around them, the crimson velvet seats began to fill, each one swallowing a shadow, a heartbeat, a stranger's expectation. And as the murmur of the crowd dimmed, Amelia realized she had finally become what she once feared, the very center of every gaze, every breath, every whisper. Everyone wondered how she could stand there beside Jasper Wood, the man whose name had become both myth and mourning. Before the curtain called her forward, Amelia turned to the mirror for one final glance. Yet the reflection that met her was not her own. In that fragile silver frame, she saw a woman she no longer recognized, a woman who had already stepped beyond the border of the living into a life that existed only in memory, or perhaps in art. Seconds before the play began, Jasper reached for her hand. Their fingers met, a quiet promise, a farewell disguised as devotion. Together, they stepped into the light, and when the curtains rose, it was not merely a play that began. It was revelation. Before the eyes of the world, two souls performed their final act, a confession of love so pure it could no longer exist among the living. They were ready now, utterly, absolutely ready. No human power could stop them, for what stood before the audience was no longer man and woman, but the echo of what love becomes when it dares to defy death itself. Jasper Wood had not been born with Amelia, but in that golden light he was reborn through her. And as the final silence fell over the stage, it was as though the world itself had witnessed their resurrection, not in life, but in the undying eternity of the story they left behind. He was going to die. How could he ever put into words the boundless gratitude he felt for the woman who had chosen to die beside him? Even his wife hadn't wished to share his death. She had preferred to face the end alone rather than die in his arms. When the theater's enchanted curtain, one that had witnessed countless plays before, slowly drew open, Amelia stepped forward, her breath trembling with the weight of destiny. "My love, what troubles you so deeply? Is it death you fear?" Amelia spoke her line softly, her voice trembling with sincerity. It was Jasper's turn to speak. "Oh, my dearest love," cried Jasper, "it isn't death that frightens me." "Then what is it?" she pressed gently. "What has turned your eyes so distant, your heart so cold? What shadow haunts your soul?" She played her role with such fragile beauty that the audience could no longer tell where Amelia ended and the character began. From the other side of the stage, Jasper Wood stepped closer, his tone no longer belonging to an actor, but to a man laying his soul bare. "Loneliness," he whispered. "That's my only fear, the emptiness of dying alone. Even death itself is kinder than that." The audience was motionless, their eyes fixed on him, as though time itself had forgotten to breathe. Amelia turned to the wooden staircase at the center of the stage. She climbed slowly, step by step, each creak echoing like a heartbeat fading into silence. Every sound of the wood was a reminder. The end was near. Jasper had told her countless times how they would end it. Amelia would throw herself from the staircase, and the moment she fell, Jasper would pull the gun hidden inside his coat and fire into his chest. In doing so, they would be reunited in another world where no pain could reach them and eternal happiness awaited. When Amelia reached the final step, she looked into Jasper Wood's eyes. There was no fear there, only trust. In so short a time, she had come to trust this man more deeply than she had ever trusted anyone in her life. For a fleeting second, she believed him. She believed that love might truly conquer even death. Amelia reached the last step. The wooden stair groaned beneath her weight, a sound that seemed to echo through eternity. She turned her head, and there he was, Jasper Wood, watching her with a gaze that carried both farewell and devotion. She turned her head, and there he was, Jasper Wood, watching her with a gaze that carried both farewell and devotion. For a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. The stage, the velvet seats, the countless eyes fixed upon them. It was only the two of them now, suspended between life and the afterlife. Amelia looked into his eyes with unwavering faith. In that fleeting instant, she trusted him more than she had ever trusted anyone, more than life itself. For so long, trust had been a stranger to her, but Jasper had become the only truth she could believe in. He gave her the courage to step beyond the world. Jasper's hands trembled slightly inside his coat, fingers brushing against the cold steel of the revolver hidden there. He had promised her this would be their ending, their perfect scene, their shared escape from the cruelty of loneliness. No curtain would ever fall on their love. Death itself would become their standing ovation. The orchestra began its final crescendo, strings weeping softly like angels mourning too soon. A single spotlight fell on Amelia, turning her into a living silhouette, half shadow, half light. She spread her arms as if to embrace the emptiness below. Then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that belongs only to those who have made peace with the inevitable. The audience thought it was part of the act. They didn't know that every breath on that stage was real. Terribly, beautifully real. Amelia stepped forward. Her body fell like a broken feather through the silence. Return to black, the final scene. The city's grandest theater fell into a silence so absolute, it seemed even time held its breath. Only one sound was missing, the gunshot. Jasper Wood had sworn that the moment Amelia leapt, he would follow her, not into applause, but into eternity. He had promised to press the barrel not against his head, but against his heart, so that the final sound they shared would be the echo of love itself. But no sound came. No thunder of steel, no release. Only the unbearable stillness of a promise broken. When the crimson curtain lifted once more, the audience rose to their feet, applauding what they believed to be the most haunting performance of their lives. Yet as the applause echoed, their smiles faltered. because Amelia did not rise for her bow. She lay motionless upon the stage, her white lace gown soaked scarlet, the light catching the curve of her hand that still reached for something unseen. Jasper stood at the far end of the stage, eyes fixed on her, as if distance alone could undo what had been done. He could not move. He could not even weep. He had promised her he would not let her cross alone. And yet here he was, stranded on the edge of the living. The screams began to rise. Real ones, not part of any act. The theater swelled with chaos, but Jasper heard none of it. The gun slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering to the floor like a broken truth. He stared at it. The same weapon his wife, Julia Wood, had once used to end her own life. He could still hear her voice, faint and accusing. "One day, Jasper, you'll understand what true cowardice costs." Now at last he did. He knelt beside Amelia, brushed a lock of her blood-damp hair away, and for a moment her stillness almost looked like peace. The kind of peace he had chased through a lifetime of empty plays. This time the grand hall was overflowing not with applause, but with the piercing screams of a horrified audience. Jasper could barely comprehend the moment when the gun slipped from his trembling hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud. He had always been a selfish man. Everyone knew that. Yet tonight, he felt more selfish than ever before. He couldn't even bring himself to use the very gun that had once claimed his beloved wife's life. It was the same weapon Julia Wood had turned upon herself. Moments before pulling the trigger, she had left Jasper a cruel kind of testament. "The day you finally manage to strip away your damned selfishness and cowardice, shoot yourself with this gun, just as I have done." It was the only thing she had been able to say before she died, the only truth she had ever left him. Now Jasper had witnessed the death of his precious wife, and, like some merciless repetition of fate, he had also watched poor Amelia's tragic end unfold before his very eyes. When the horrified crowd finally fled the theater, leaving behind the echo of their footsteps and the scent of fear, Jasper remained alone, alone with Amelia's lifeless body, alone with the unbearable silence that followed every act of love he had ever destroyed. The young woman's lace gown, which flowed all the way down to her knees, was now soaked in crimson. It was Jasper who had chosen that dress for her. A symbol of purity, he remembered the first night they met, and the photograph they had taken together. Amelia had been wearing that same dress. Jasper swore to himself that he would keep the gun, the photograph, and Amelia's blood-stained dress hidden from the world until the very end of his days. For that dress, that single bullet, and that one captured night, perhaps the happiest night of his life, stood as the ultimate proof of what Jasper Wood truly was. A selfish, cowardly man who could neither love fully nor die bravely. He knew he wouldn't be arrested. The authorities would call Amelia's death a tragic accident, a moment of misfortune during a performance gone wrong. But Jasper knew better. Every one of those objects, the gun, the photograph, the dress, had become nothing more than instruments of murder. He looked around the stage one last time and drew in a deep, trembling breath. Somewhere within him, there lingered a faint sense of comfort. Amelia had fulfilled her greatest wish. It was himself he had lost all hope in. Amelia had already turned to white, her soul released, her pain dissolved. But Jasper was condemned to black, to the eternal darkness he had painted with his own hands. If only he had found the courage to pull the trigger, he too might have turned to white, freed like her. But he hadn't. Jasper Wood had once again fallen back into the depths of his own world. He had returned to black. End. Julian read the final lines of the story in a whisper. Silence enveloped the room. Only the wind lingered, sighing against the window frame. He rested his hand on the book's yellowed pages and closed his eyes for a moment. Then, slowly, as if he were carrying the breath of the entire world, he shut the cover. Dust rose, swirling in the dim light like a small storm. "Every story ends," he murmured to himself, his voice soft as a prayer. He straightened the spine, his fingertips tracing its name like a benediction, ink and strings. Then he placed it back where it belonged, on the shelf. For a brief moment, two faint shadows stirred in the narrow darkness between the books, one wearing a tattered dress, the other still holding a glimmer in his eyes. Lila. Julian's gaze met hers, but Lila no longer breathed. She was only a puppet now. Her bright eyes were frozen behind the glass, her strings loosened by an unseen hand. Like Jasper and Amelia, she had been born from Julian's fingers, had lived by the air of his breath. He paused, then touched the book's spine, gently, as if brushing her cheek. "Sleep now," he whispered. I will know when it's time for you to return." He turned off the light. For an instant, the faint pull of strings echoed in the silence, as though the puppets were already longing for the stage once more. A dim light lingered in the room. The dust shimmered in the air like stars of an invisible cosmos. Julian stared at the final line before him, then slowly closed the book. In that moment, a small piece of the universe fell silent. A thin breath of wind passed through the pages, as if something within them was still alive. Julian held his hand upon the cover, brushing away the dust, and whispered, "And on the seventh day, God rested." The dust scattered into the light, dissolving like golden mist. "It's time for silence now," he said. Leela bowed her head. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she fell backward, like a puppet whose strings had been cut by an unseen hand. With her, Amelia, Jasper, and all the others faded too. Their bodies made of words retreated into the darkness between the pages. Julian lifted the book and placed it on the shelf. The gesture was almost sacred, a creator sealing his universe. "Farewell," he whispered. "You don't need to hear me anymore." The books upon the shelf were silent, yet within that silence countless voices slept, each one a prayer, waiting to be read, waiting to exist again. Julian stepped back, his figure dissolving into shadow. He was no longer merely a writer. He was a god, watching the stillness of his creation. And somewhere, beyond the dark, a single sentence echoed, "Even gods forget their stories sometimes." From the private notes of Julian M. How to make the perfect puppet. Guide 1. Materials a heart is not required. Hearts tend to remember. Instead, take a fragment of silence, the kind that hums after prayer. Find eyes that can hold both light and ruin. Add a handful of dust. Only dust remembers creation. Point 2. Building the body, do not carve from wood. Carve from words. Let language be the bone, rhythm the skin, and your hesitation the pulse beneath it all. Shape the fingers delicately. They will always mirror your own. Keep the joints loose. Too much control kills the illusion of choice. Point 3. Giving breath, puppets do not breathe, but they recall the echo of breath. Whisper a memory into their hollow chest. The name of a city that no longer exists, or the first lie you ever told yourself. When the strings tremble, you will know. They have begun to dream. 4. The soul of emptiness leaves something unfinished. A word, a thought, a touch. Even gods must allow imperfection, or else nothing will long for them. Emptiness is the most loyal soul a creation can have. Point 5. The secret of strings: never tie a knot. A knot ends the story. Let every string hum faintly, as if waiting for your hand, and when one moves on its own, you'll understand it has remembered you. Point 6. Final step. Forget the perfect puppet must never know the name of its maker. Place it upon a shelf, close the cover, and walk away. Let time bury it in dust and myth. But sometimes, when the wind turns and the silence shifts, the strings will move again, and you will feel that pull, that soft, divine ache. That is when you'll wish to create again. But remember, every god who makes one puppet too many becomes one. He signed the bottom corner, his handwriting almost fading into the paper's grain. Below it, faintly printed as if time itself had whispered it, R.